Hello dear students. Today we are going to discuss about a topic, what is political philosophy. We have a few objectives. Firstly, we will discuss what is political philosophy by underlining core concepts. Secondly, we will map the various ways of defining political philosophy. Thirdly, delineating two approaches to political philosophy. And lastly, we will learn about the roles of political philosophy, or simply significance of doing political philosophy. Let's come to introduction. Political philosophy is a sub-discipline common to the disciplines of philosophy and political science. To philosophy, it's one of the several branches of the subject, and in political science, it's a basic disciplinary exercise that supplies the key concepts, major ideas, and theories. Political philosophy engages with the fundamental framework of the normative considerations for evaluating the political actions and order. The descriptive or empirical studies are conducted in the background of normative questions. For example, who gets what is implicitly drawn over who ought to get what. Generally, political philosophy is an intense engagement with this aspect of question, which is ought. That, however, does not mean practical aspect is irrelevant to a political philosopher. Rather, she assesses practical in light of the ideal. Some of the major normative and political concepts that political philosophy deals with are justice, liberty, dignity, equality, fraternity, autonomy, political obligations, democracy, and community. It also examines the institutions that are important for legitimate rule like state and government. It's principally concerned with who should rule over whom and why. And what's the point of political obligation? Let us attempt to define political philosophy beginning with a preliminary definition. Human world is where goods are conceptualized and distributed. The conceptualization of the goods influences the distribution of the goods. And these goods also include political goods like rights, individual freedoms, community rights, equality, and justice. Political philosophy investigates the practical political world and argues that standards are needed to evaluate the fairness or justness of the existing social, political, and economic institutions. Such an evaluation is part of the process of knowing the political objects truly. It is in this sense a famous political philosopher of the 20th century, Leo Strauss, in his famous essay, What's Political Philosophy, defined political philosophy as the attempt to know both the nature of the political things and the right or the good political order. Following Plato's dictum, he described political philosophy as a philosophic enterprise that replaces opinion about the nature of the political things by the knowledge of political things. So part of this exercise is to gain wisdom by truly knowing the right political order, and the other part is to scrutinize the existing political actions. Therefore, political philosophy, by examining the nature of the political order, prescribes preservation or change. He says, political things are by their nature subjected to approval, all disapproval, to choice and rejection, to praise and blame. Similarly, a prominent contemporary philosopher, Thomas Cicerone, in his book The Difficulty of Tolerance, argues that political philosophy is concerned with developing standards that are influenced by the deeper understanding of notions such as rights, justice, liberty, and equality. Such standards help us in assessing the political, legal, and economic institutions. The basic concern is whether the constitutions and the political institutions are just and whether they respect the rights of the individuals. These points bear out that the major concern of political philosophy is what set of political or economic institutions ought to be in place to make human life worth living. For example, human dignity, which is an uncompromising or unconditional value, can thus be taken as a standard measure for justificatory political life. Conceptual way. A more nuanced way of defining political philosophy is to explore its central conceptual preoccupations. Rather being crudely explanatory, political philosophy concerns normative assumptions that shape both individual and collective judgments about the right political order. It attempts to settle down the relationship between individuals and individuals as agents, between individuals and groups or community as members, between individuals and nation as constituent elements, and between individuals and state as citizens. Taken in this sense, political philosophy deliberates about the purposes or ends of the collective life. It reasons about the collective and the rationale of the collective. There are varied responses to this question. Some philosophers, like John Rawls, treat social justice as a primary political value. Ronald Dworkin regards equality as a sovereign virtue. To Amartya Sen, it is to eliminate the unfreedoms that enslave human life. Getting on to define political philosophy in this vein, Sir Isabelle suggests that it is about men's relationships to each other and to their institutions in terms of purposes and scales of value which themselves alter as a result of historical circumstances of varying types, not least in terms of new models derived from other fields of experience. There are some philosophers like Bernard Williams who suggest that political philosophy is a distinct and independent discipline that primarily examines power, legitimacy, and obligation. Therefore, taken together, political philosophy is a focused study of the fundamental concepts and theoretical formulations of political life like justice, liberty, equality, citizenship, power, legitimacy, and authority. Institutional way. The human beings have had developed institutions to organize the collective life. In view of some of philosophers, the collective political life of the individuals ought to be organized or operated on the lines of nature, for it is the necessity of an individual to live in the society. Thus, to Aristotle, the polis or the state is a natural institution that grows out of the need of the individuals and is directed towards the end of the good life. And to some others, the collective life of the individuals to be subjected to an artificial control called the sovereign or the state. The state, though hurtles the individual freedom, guarantees the right of life, liberty, and property. In this perspective, political philosophy concerns with what state ought to do. It also means to examine how the absolute power of the people, the collective power, be organized and striking a balance between authority of the state and the autonomy of the individuals. The people offer consent to the laws of the state and abide by the decisions of the government with an expectation of protection of their rights and freedoms. Therefore, the institutional way of defining political philosophy is focused on justification and limitations of the state and government. The Oxford Companion to Philosophy offers us a definition that matches this institutional way. It says, political philosophy evaluates social organization, especially government, from an ethical point of view, but also studies the facts about the social organization. These are thus two not sharply distinguishable aspects of political philosophy, and how they ought to be related is a good question. The ethical normative aspects, which is ethics, and the descriptive explanatory. Broader way. In his long and seminal introduction to Hobbes' Leviathan, Michael Oakeshott argues that political philosophy is a focused study of the relationship of politics and eternity that makes the values and the goals related to political life reflected through the entire conception of the world that belongs to a civilization. He says, at all other levels of reflection on political life, we have before us the single word of political activity. And what we are interested is in the internal coherence of that world. But in political philosophy, we have in our minds that world and another world. And our idea is to explore the coherence of the two worlds together. While Michael Oakeshott invokes history and civilization, some political philosophers attempted to address the question of collective life in a far more serious way. That's, how should we live? One can recall Plato's The Republic. In Book 2 of The Republic, Socrates underlines the fundamental question by saying that we are discussing no small matter, but how we ought to live. We humans have diverse individual interests. We share the membership of groups and communities. We follow different religions and subscribe to moral views that are influenced or borrowed from the groups, communities, religions, or even atheism. We share cultural memberships. Rather than being abstracted individuals of isolated islands, we live in and with the communities, cultures, nationalities, and share and exchange goods, including political goods. How should we live has now an added dimension. How should we live together? Political philosophy broadly deals with this question. To me, it's a disciplinary inquiry which immensely engages with deliberations of grammar of collective consensual political life that secures agency and moral dignity of individuals without ridiculing the group or community ethos or membership of the people. The purpose of the collective life or togetherness cannot be drawn arbitrarily through coercion or force. It cannot be written as a bargain or a compromise. The entire tradition of classical political philosophy, from Plato to John Rawls, offers very fascinating answers to this intriguing question: how should we live together? A contemporary political philosopher, Charles Lawmore, succinctly puts it like this: you have your moral views, I have mine, and each of us is convinced that he is right, standing ready to show the other the error of his ways. But once we confront the problem of how people like us ought to live together, we enter the terrain of political philosophy. Let's come to two approaches to political philosophy. There is a division among scholars in delineating the appropriate approach to the understanding of political philosophy. One can see the two clear divisions. One sees it as an integral part of moral philosophy. The other sees it grounded in the practical political realms. The basic starting point to get into this discussion is eloquently offered by Jonathan Wolff in his book Introduction to Political Philosophy, that begins with the twofold question: who gets what and says who? The former question deals with the distribution of goods like material objects or resources, liberties, rights, and remedies. The other is preoccupied with the conceptualization, exercise, and limitations of political power. The first is essentially a normative consideration grounded in who ought to get what and what ought to be the principles of distribution that are just and fair. The second is more practical predisposition, as John Locke holds in his classic work, The Second Treatise of the Government. Political power is a right of making laws with penalties of death and consequently or less penalties for the regulating and preserving of property and of employing the force of the community in the execution of such laws and in the defense of commonwealth from the foreign injury, and all this only for the public good. In this definition, Locke uses the word property very generally, which he defined in this text as life, liberty, and property, and the term force means the sovereignty or the supremacy of the collective power of the people of whom entire jurisdiction lies with the state. This brief discussion indicates that political philosophy can be approached either as normative exercise or as an explanatory or a descriptive enterprise. These are two different approaches, but not disconnected or distinct approaches. There is an interlinkage between the two. Ordinarily, we contrast explanatory studies with the normative ones, and going by this, political philosophy is a normative discipline, meaning that it tries to establish norms, rules, or ideal standards, says Jonathan Wolff. While as descriptive studies are set to examine the facts, for example, who holds political power, such a strict division is misleading for the reason that the descriptive questions are implicitly founded on the moral constraints. The same explanatory question, who holds political power, has an implicit foregrounding in the concerns for equality or fair distribution of power and obligation. Here, Political philosophy handles both the domains and attempts to develop compatibility or a balance between individual autonomy and state authority. There is a substantive way to discuss this puzzling theme. The philosophies of Aristotle and Hobbes greatly help in unraveling the peculiar character of political philosophy. For Aristotle, the aim of political association is to promote human good, which is the ultimate end of the human life. The telos, or purpose of the political association, is the realization of a flourishing life. It is the highest ideal of the human societies, and no individual can realize the end of life, which is moral goodness, on her own. Isolated individual life is therefore suboptimal or undesirable, for it cannot have all the resources at its disposal that are required for a good life. These resources include material possessions, education, and public deliberations. Political life, in this sense, is an all-encompassing sphere concerned with the distribution of these resources. It includes all other kinds of subordinate activities, the formulation and the implementation of rules of justice that are established by the political association are widely applicable compared to the narrow jurisdiction of the laws of a family, tribe, or race. They are causally binding on all people. This universality and force of authority is unique to political life. For Hobbes, on the other hand, the definition of state is very restrictive. The purpose of the state is to simply protect the people. He does not appeal to the ethical dimensions of human nature that Aristotle evokes. To him, it's unnecessary to think or debate that the human understanding about good or evil can create an overarching state. These are disputed questions, and people do not easily agree on the definition and content of good and evil, rather utilize good or evil for accomplishing their interests. In the absence of unanimity, Hobbes contends that it is law which has the potential to provide a common standard against which human activities in a political association can be evaluated and judged. Hence, the difference in these two lies in the principles that govern institutional formations. While Aristotle appeals to ethics of human nature to construct arguments of vision of political life for the common good, Hobbes is skeptical about the possibility of survival of human life in absence of powerful sovereign authority mandated to control the selfish human desires of unbound competition, glory, and diffidence. Let's come to the roles of political philosophy. We can get into the problem of exploring significance or roles of political philosophy by taking a look at a simple question: why political philosophers do what they do, or what is the point of doing political philosophy? Following John Rawls, one of the most important political philosophers of the 20th century, we will discuss 4 roles of political philosophy that he sketched in his book, Justice as Fairness, a Restatement. Here is the summary of the arguments of John Rawls. First, practical role. Societies at times are confronted with divisive political conflicts. The disagreements over certain basic questions lead to deep and sharp conflicts. In such a situation, the possibility of exercising very basic right to life becomes uncertain. The human history is full of such instances where any reasoned common ground for political agreement was becoming very challenging. All the major classical texts of political philosophy are largely influenced by the immediate political events that became threatening to the vision of collective life. Plato's The Republic is one of the earliest exemplary responses to tumultuous political developments of the ancient Greece. Thomas Hobbes wrote The Leviathan as a response to deep uncertainty and worrisome conditions caused by the Civil War in England. Both Hobbes and Locke attempted to underline the need of reasoned agreement to end the turmoil in England. Therefore, developing an agreement out of the conflicting visions through philosophizing human agency and authority is a practical task of political philosophy. Some political values, like liberty and equality, can contest one another. That means more the liberty, lesser the equality, and conversely, the serious commitment to equality asks for compromises with the liberty. At some other times, the various notions of liberty can compete with one another. Therefore, Rawls notes, one task of political philosophy, its practical role, is to focus on deeply disputed questions and to see whether some underlying basis of philosophical and moral agreement can be uncovered. Second, orientation role. Political philosophy is a work of reason. It orients people to live in and with particular set of political and economic institutions. It can act as a guide to the citizens of the impartial purposes of the collective life and significance of a fair basic constitutional structure. For example, it serves as a medium of developing civic cultures in democracies. Rawls calls it orientation role. Political philosophy is thus a reflective exercise that makes people to reason about the existing specified principles for realizing the rational ends of life. It is to make people understand the significance of their membership in the political association. As Rawls says, the idea is that it belongs to the reason and reflection, both theoretical and practical, to orient us in the conceptual space, say, of all possible ends, individual and associational, political and social. Third, reconciliation role. Political philosophy can act as a means to calm down the frustration and anger of people against the society by showcasing them the deeper rationale of social and political institutions that seem unacceptable to them. Hegel's philosophy of right is a classic example of reconciliation. While Hegel impressed to reconcile with the social world positively, he held, when we look at the world rationally, the world looks rationally back. There is another side to it. The pluralism is a fact of the contemporary societies. People share wide and varied memberships. In such pervasive diversity, homogeneity is not possible. Any political design that aims at total assimilation will have to reconcile with the fact of pluralism of the societies. Conversely, any committed particularism with sovereign political ambitions is to realize the limitations of absolute particularism, for it breeds unacceptable fundamentalism. So diverse identities are to coexist even though uneasily. Rawls also argues that our presence in political society is neither voluntary nor free, for we simply find ourselves in a particular society at a certain moment of the historical time. Finally, realistic utopia. Political philosophy, as we discussed in the preliminary definition, can be a vehicle of prescribing the change in political system if it falls short of a decent order. It can become a motivating force to pursue establishment of free and fair society. It may lay down a manifesto to make the world as far as possible a better place to live in. One can recall entire corps of the interventions of philosophical works that aim to wash away the chains of human slavery. Human emancipation is a desired goal that many radical political theorists attended to. In case of liberal philosophy, Rawls argued that a political philosopher is to probe the limits of practicable political possibility. There are unavoidable constraints within which a philosopher is to deliberate on transforming the societies into just democratic societies. The fact of reasonable pluralism, according to Rawls, is a limitation or a constraint that cannot be done away with. With this problem taken as existing condition, we can, to a greater or a lesser extent, change the political and social institutions, and much else. Such a role of political philosophy is taken as realistic utopia. The radical accounts of seeking the revolutionary changes have conventionally been treated as utopia. Whether achievable or not, the idealistic principles have influenced many momentous events and revolutions in the past. Thank you, dear students. Hope it was a good learning session for all of you.